Do not make a sound. Do not utter a single word. Your life depends on it.
The most dangerous man in England sat down next to me on the 4:15 train from London to Edinburgh and said, "You're my wife for the next 3 hours." I was eating a meat pie. It was not a good meat pie. It was the kind of pie you buy from a platform vendor for 3p, more crust than filling, the gravy cold, the meat of uncertain origin. I was eating it carefully, slowly, because it was the only food I'd had since yesterday morning, and I was trying to make it last until Scotland. The man appeared without warning. One moment the seat beside me was empty. I had chosen the last carriage specifically because it was empty, and the next, 6 feet and 2 inches of dark wool greatcoat, sharp cheekbones, and barely contained panic, was sitting so close that his thigh pressed against mine. He smelled of rain, expensive leather, and blood. The blood was fresh. I could see it, a dark stain seeping through the left side of his coat, just above the hip. "I beg your pardon?" I said, because I was raised by a vicar, and even when a bleeding stranger commandeers your railway compartment, one maintains standards. He turned his head, and I understood, in a single heartbeat, why this man was dangerous. He was beautiful, not merely handsome. Handsome is symmetry, is pleasing features, is a face that draws a polite second glance at a country dance. This man was ruinous. Dark hair, damp with rain, falling across a high forehead, eyes the color of a January sky, pale, piercing, almost silver, a jawline that could have been chiseled from marble by an Italian sculptor with a grudge against soft things. He looked like the kind of man who made women weep and men step aside. He was also, very clearly, terrified. "My name is Lord Cavendish," he said, his voice low, clipped, vibrating with controlled urgency. "The Duke of Cavendish. There are 3 men on this train who intend to kill me before we reach the Scottish border. I am wounded, I am unarmed, and I am, unfortunately, supposed to be traveling alone." He paused. His silver eyes swept over my threadbare brown dress, my cold meat pie, my small carpet bag. He was assessing me the way a general assesses a battlefield, searching for any advantage. "A man traveling alone is a target," he continued. "A man traveling with his wife is a bystander. You are the only woman in this carriage. I need you to be my wife. For 3 hours, until Edinburgh, after which I will pay you £50, put you on the finest carriage to anywhere you wish to go, and you will never see me again. £50. I earned £6 a year as a seamstress. £50 was 8 years of my life. £50 was a rented room that didn't leak, a meal every day, a winter without choosing between food and coal. I looked at the blood soaking through his coat. I looked at his face, the fear he was trying to hide behind that aristocratic mask. I looked at my meat pie. "You're bleeding," I said. "It's superficial." "It isn't. That's your lower left abdomen. If it reaches the peritoneum." He blinked. The mask cracked, just for a fraction of a second, and underneath it I caught a flash of raw surprise. "Are you a physician?" he asked. "I'm a seamstress," I said, "but I read. Now take off your coat and let me see the wound." "Darling, before you bleed to death in front of your wife." That was the moment. I didn't know it then, but I know it now. That was the moment the Duke of Cavendish looked at a woman in a brown dress, holding a 3-penny meat pie, and fell completely, irrevocably, catastrophically in love. My name is Vivian Cole. I was 26 years old, penniless, alone, and heading to Scotland to take a position as a seamstress in a textile mill that would likely destroy my eyesight within 5 years. And for the next 3 hours, I was a duchess. This is the story of the lie that saved his life, and the truth that changed mine. I tore the lining from his coat and used it to pack the wound. It was a blade, not a bullet, a clean, deep slash across the oblique muscles that had missed anything vital by approximately 1 inch. I knew this because, While I was indeed a seamstress, I was a seamstress who had spent every spare penny of the last 4 years on anatomy textbooks purchased from second-hand bookshops. I could stitch silk. I could also identify every muscle, bone, and organ in the human body. The Duke watched me work with those unsettling silver eyes. "Who taught you this?" he murmured, his jaw tight against the pane. "A book called Anatomy of the Human Frame." "By Dr. William Bell," I said, tying off the makeshift bandage, "and a great deal of practice stitching fabric that didn't scream. You're wasted as a seamstress." "Yes," I agreed simply, "I am. Now tell me about the men who want to kill you, because if I'm going to be your wife, I need to know what I'm lying about." He told me, quickly, efficiently, the way men speak when they are running out of time. His elder brother, Lord Marcus Cavendish, had died 6 weeks ago. Officially, a riding accident. Unofficially, murdered, poisoned, then thrown from a horse to disguise it. The Duke had found letters proving that Lord Pembroke, a powerful magistrate, had orchestrated the murder to gain control of a vast shipping contract that the Cavendish estate controlled. The evidence, a bundle of letters and a signed ledger, was in the leather case beneath his seat. Pembroke's men were on the train, 3 of them. They had already cornered him on the platform and put a knife in his side. He had escaped into the crowd, bled his way through 3 carriages, and found me. "If they find me alone," he said, "they will kill me and take the case. If they find a married couple traveling together, they may pass through. Pembroke's men are looking for a solitary duke, not a husband and wife. And if they don't pass through?" He was quiet for a moment. "Then I will do whatever is necessary to ensure they don't touch you." There was something in his voice when he said, "You," not the polite, transactional "you" of a man hiring a stranger for a ruse, something rawer, as though in the 7 minutes since he had sat down, I had already become something more than a convenient prop. "Eat your pie," he added softly. "You haven't finished it." I stared at him. This man was wounded, hunted, and carrying evidence that could destroy one of the most powerful magistrates in England. And he had noticed that I hadn't finished a threepenny meat pie. I ate the pie. For the next hour, we became married. It was, I must confess, disturbingly easy. He draped his arm along the back of my seat. I leaned into his shoulder, partly for the performance, partly because the carriage was cold and he radiated heat like a furnace. We spoke quietly, heads close together, and anyone glancing through the compartment window would have seen exactly what he wanted them to see. A well-dressed gentleman and his wife, traveling to Scotland, deep in intimate conversation. But the conversation was real. That was the dangerous part. He asked me about my books, not in the way men usually ask women about their reading, that slightly condescending curiosity. "How charming that you read," but with genuine, sharp-edged interest. When I mentioned that I had taught myself basic anatomy from textbooks, he didn't laugh. He asked which textbooks, whether I preferred Bell or Hunter, and whether I had read the latest paper on anesthetic ether published in the Lancet. I had. I had stolen the journal from a physician's waiting room. He smiled at that, a real smile, not the cold, diplomatic mask. It transformed his face, made the sharp edges soften, made those silver eyes warm to something almost human. "You're extraordinary," he said quietly. "I'm hungry, cold, and pretending to be married to a stranger who is bleeding on my only dress," I corrected. "But thank you," he laughed. It was a low, startled sound, as though he hadn't laughed in weeks, and his body had forgotten the mechanics. And then the compartment door opened. 2 men stepped in. They were large, rough-handed, dressed in the heavy coats of hired muscle. The taller one had a jagged scar across his neck. The shorter one carried a walking stick that, from the weight of it, contained a blade. "Pardon the intrusion," the tall one said, his eyes sweeping the compartment. His gaze landed on the Duke, lingered, then moved to me. "Just checking the carriages. Looking for a gentleman traveling alone. Tall fellow, dark hair. You seen anyone fitting that description? I felt the Duke tense beside me. His hand, which had been resting on the seat behind my shoulders, dropped to my waist, pulling me closer. A possessive, protective gesture, but I could feel his fingers shaking. He was about to speak. He was about to deliver some aristocratic dismissal that would either convince them or get us both killed. I didn't let him. "Oh, darling, that sounds dreadful," I said brightly, turning to the Duke with the wide, slightly vapid smile of a woman who had never had an original thought in her life. I placed my hand on his chest, directly over his heart, which was hammering, and looked up at him with adoring, empty eyes. Should we be worried? Edmund, should we lock the compartment? Edmund! Not his name, but a name that rolled off the tongue like a wife who had been saying it for years. The Duke recovered instantly. "I'm sure it's nothing, my love," he said smoothly, covering my hand with his. "These gentlemen are just doing their job." I turned back to the men, widening my smile. "We've been in this compartment since London. Haven't seen a soul, I'm afraid. But do be careful. My husband is terribly protective, and if there's a dangerous man on this train, I shall insist he escort me to the dining car immediately." "Edmund, will you take me to the dining car? I'm famished." I was performing, the silly wife, the decorative, unthreatening, thoroughly ignorable woman, the kind of woman men like these would dismiss in 3 seconds and forget about in 5. The tall man's eyes moved over me, my threadbare dress, my plain face, my adoring smile, and dismissed me exactly as I intended. His gaze slid back to the Duke once more, searching. "Traveling to Scotland, are you?" he asked. "Edinburgh," the Duke said calmly. "My wife's family." "Your wife." The man looked at me again. I could see the calculation, the Duke's expensive coat, my cheap dress. It didn't match. I leaned my head against the Duke's shoulder and sighed contentedly. Edmund insisted on first class. I told him, "We're visiting my mother, not the king. But you know how husbands are, always wanting to show off." The shorter man snorted. The tension fractured. The tall man nodded once and stepped back. "Apologies for the disturbance, ma'am, sir." They left. The compartment door clicked shut. I stayed perfectly still against the Duke's shoulder for 10 seconds, 15, until the footsteps faded down the corridor. Then I sat up. The Duke was staring at me. "That," he said slowly, "was the most impressive piece of deception I have witnessed in my life. And I sit in the House of Lords." "You were going to say something aristocratic and get us murdered," I said, straightening my dress. "You needed a wife." "Wives are invisible. I made myself invisible." Something shifted in his eyes, a look I didn't fully understand then, a mixture of admiration and something deeper, something almost wounded, as though my words had struck a nerve he hadn't known was exposed. "You shouldn't have to be invisible," he said quietly. Before I could respond, the train lurched. A new sound. Heavy boots, running, from the front of the carriage, shouting. The third man. We had forgotten the third man. A bullet, a shattered window, and the moment the Duke realizes the woman in the brown dress is worth more than everything he owns. The compartment door crashed open. The third man was shorter than the other two, but twice as dangerous. You could see it in the way he moved, compact and controlled, a professional. He held a flintlock pistol. It was aimed at the Duke's head. "Lord Cavendish," the man said flatly. "Lord Pembroke sends his regards. The case, if you please, or the lady dies first." Everything happened in the space of 3 heartbeats. The Duke moved, surging forward, putting his body between me and the gun. "Don't touch her." But I was already moving. I had spent 4 years in a textile mill before this. 4 years operating heavy industrial looms, machines with iron shuttles that flew at lethal speeds. You learn to move fast in a mill, or you lost fingers. I had all my fingers. I grabbed the leather case from beneath the seat, heavy, solid, brass-cornered, and swung it with both hands directly into the gunman's wrist. The pistol fired. The window behind where the Duke's head had been, a half-second earlier, shattered outward, glass exploding into the rain and darkness. The bullet missed him by inches, because I had shoved him sideways with my shoulder at the exact moment I swung the case. The gunman howled, his wrist broken, the pistol clattering to the floor. The Duke was on him instantly, all 6'2" of wounded, furious aristocrat driving his fist into the man's jaw with a crack that echoed through the carriage. The gunman collapsed. Silence, just the roar of the train, the wind screaming through the shattered window, and the rain pouring in. I was on the floor. The Duke was on the floor. The gunman was unconscious between us. I was lying half on top of the Duke, my hair torn loose from its pins, my threadbare dress soaked with rain, the leather case clutched to my chest like a shield. His arm was locked around my waist, crushing me against him. Our faces were inches apart. "You pushed me," he breathed, his silver eyes wide, wild, searching my face. "The bullet, you pushed me out of the way." "You were being heroic and stupid," I gasped. "Someone had to be practical." He stared at me. Rain lashed through the broken window. The train roared onward through the night, and the Duke of Cavendish looked at a penniless seamstress lying on top of him in a shattered railway carriage and said, in a voice stripped of every mask, every title, every layer of aristocratic armor, "Who are your wife?" I whispered, for the next 47 minutes. Something in his face broke open, not the cold shattering of a man in pain, but the warm, devastating crack of a man recognizing the thing he didn't know he'd been looking for. "What if I don't want it to be 47 minutes?" he said. I couldn't answer that, because if I answered that, if I let myself believe that a man like this could look at a woman like me and mean it, I would never survive the moment he walked away. So I stood up. I smoothed my ruined dress. I tied the gunman's hands with the sash from my carpet bag. And I sat back in my seat, heart slamming against my ribs, and said, "You should let me re-stitch that wound. You've torn the bandage." He let me. He sat perfectly still while my trembling fingers fixed the dressing, and he watched my face with those silver eyes, and he did not look away. Not once. The train pulled into Edinburgh at 7:22 p.m. The platform was crowded, gaslit, loud with porters and passengers. The Duke had summoned the railway constables at the last stop. The 3 men were taken into custody. The leather case, the evidence against Lord Pembroke, was safe. We stood on the platform. The rain had stopped. The evening sky was a deep, luminous midnight blue, the exact color I would never be able to look at again without thinking of this man. He held out a small leather purse. £50, our agreement. I looked at it. I looked at him. "Thank you, Miss Cole," he said. His voice was formal. His eyes were not. "You saved my life." "You saved mine first," I said. £50 is a life for someone like me." He flinched. A small, almost invisible movement, but I saw it. The flinch of a man who had just been reminded of the canyon between his world and hers. "If you ever need," he began. "Don't," I said gently. "Don't make promises on a train platform, Your Grace. The carriage will come, and the real world will come, and you will be a duke, and I will be a seamstress, and the 3 hours will have been exactly what you said they were, a performance." I took the £50. I picked up my carpet bag. I walked away. I did not look back. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But I was a vicar's daughter, and I had my pride, and looking back would have broken me. What I did not know, what I could not have known, was that the Duke of Cavendish stood on that Edinburgh platform long after I had disappeared into the crowd. He stood there until the porters began sweeping, until the gas lamps flickered low, until his man of business found him and begged him to come to the carriage. And when he finally moved, he said one thing: find her. He found me in 11 days. I was in a cramped room above a draper's shop in the old town, taking in piecework, mending shirts, hemming curtains, the grinding, eye-destroying labor that 50 pounds could have saved me from. But I hadn't spent the money. It sat in its leather purse beneath my mattress, untouched. Spending it would have made the 3 hours real, and I needed them to be a dream, because dreams you can survive losing. The knock came at 6 in the evening. I opened the door, expecting the draper. The Duke of Cavendish stood in the narrow, filthy hallway of a working man's boarding house, dressed in a greatcoat that cost more than the entire building. He filled the doorframe, too tall, too broad, for a space this small. "You left," he said, as though it were an accusation. "Our 3 hours were over." "They don't feel over." His voice was raw. "I have slept 9 hours in 11 days. I have had my investigators searching every textile mill, every seamstress registry, every boarding house in Edinburgh. I have ignored a summons from the House of Lords, cancelled 2 political dinners, and shouted at my valet. And I never shout at my valet. He is a saint." "Why?" I whispered, though I knew. I knew from the way he looked at me, the same way he had looked at me on the floor of a shattered railway carriage, as though I were something impossible. "Because you pushed me out of the way of a bullet with your bare hands," he said, stepping into my room. "Because you bandaged my wound with your own coat lining and then told me I was being heroic and stupid. Because you turned yourself invisible to save my life and then told me you shouldn't have to be invisible. Because I have attended 1,000 ballrooms and 100 political salons, and I have never met anyone like you." He stopped. He was standing in the middle of my tiny room, between my narrow bed and my sewing table, and he looked completely, magnificently out of place. "I came to tell you 2 things," he said. "First, Lord Pembroke has been arrested. The evidence was presented to the magistrate. He will hang for your brother's murder." "Your brother's murder?" I corrected softly. "My brother's murder," he repeated, and his voice cracked, just barely. "The letters you protected with your body on that train, they convicted him. You did that. And the second thing?" He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather folder. He opened it and held it out to me. It was a letter of admission to the Edinburgh School of Medicine, in my name, elective studies in anatomy and surgical practice. Full tuition, paid. "I wrote to the dean," the Duke said. "I told him about a woman who performed emergency wound care on a moving train with a coat lining and a steady hand and more anatomical knowledge than half the physicians in London. He said, 'Women are not admitted.' I told him to change the policy or I would purchase the building and change it myself." I stared at the letter. The words blurred. My eyes were burning. "I'm not buying you," he said quickly, fiercely. "I'm not paying for a wife. I'm not paying for the 3 hours. This is because you are brilliant, Vivienne, and the world is wasting you, and I categorically refuse to watch the most extraordinary woman I have ever met destroy her eyesight hemming curtains in a room that doesn't even have a proper window." I was crying. I, who had not cried since my father's funeral. I, who had survived a textile mill, a train attack, and a life of invisible, grinding poverty without shedding a single tear. I was standing in my terrible little room, holding a letter that represented everything I had ever wanted, and I was weeping. "You don't even know me," I managed. "I know you in 3 hours better than I know people I've known for 30 years, he said. He stepped closer. He reached out, slowly, carefully, and brushed a tear from my cheek with his thumb. "But I would very much like the chance to know you for longer. Not as my fake wife, as Vivienne. Just Vivienne. You're a duke. Yes, it's dreadful. The paperwork alone would make you weep." I laughed. a broken, wet, ridiculous laugh that came out more like a sob. He smiled, that devastating, face-transforming smile from the train, and for a moment, the room didn't feel small at all. The trial of Lord Pembroke was the scandal of the season. He was convicted of the murder of Lord Marcus Cavendish, stripped of his titles, and sentenced to hang. The letters, the ones I had shielded with my body in a shattered railway carriage, were read aloud in the courtroom. The gallery wept. I enrolled at the Edinburgh School of Medicine. I was the first woman admitted. The dean was, I believe, still slightly afraid of the Duke. On my first day, a professor asked me to identify a muscle in a cadaver diagram. I named it, its origin, its insertion, and its blood supply. He didn't ask me another question for the rest of the term. He didn't need to. And the Duke? The Duke of Cavendish came to Edinburgh every fortnight. He sat in the back row of my anatomy lectures, 6 feet 2 inches of dark greatcoat folded into a student's wooden chair, his long legs cramped, his silver eyes fixed on me with an expression of undisguised, luminous pride. After lectures, we walked along the Royal Mile. He told me about his brother, the grief he carried like a second wound beneath his ribs. I told him about my father, the vicar who had taught me to read, who had fed my hunger for knowledge until the day he died and left me with nothing but his books, and his conviction that a woman's mind was the equal of any man's. We argued about medicine. We argued about politics. We argued about the correct way to bandage a laceration. He was wrong. I told him so. He looked delighted about it. On the anniversary of the train journey, he appeared at my door with a small box. Inside was a ring, not a diamond, not a ruby, a sapphire, deep, luminous midnight blue, the color of the sky through the train window. I promised you 3 hours, he said. I am now asking for a lifetime. I know the contract is significantly less favorable. There's no £50 escape clause. The hours are infinite, and I am, as you once noted, heroic and stupid. You are, I agreed. But I love you, Vivian Cole. I have loved you since you bandaged my wound with a coat lining and told me to eat my pie. I loved you when you made yourself invisible to save my life, and I have spent every day since trying to make sure you are never invisible again. I looked at this man, this powerful, grieving, magnificent man who had searched 11 days for a seamstress, bullied a university into admitting a woman, and sat in the back of anatomy lectures because he wanted to watch me learn. I have a condition, I said. Name it. I finish my degree. I become a physician. I practice medicine. I am not decorative. I am not contained. And I am not manageable. I would sooner manage a hurricane, he said solemnly. Good answer, I whispered. I took the ring. I took the man. I took the life I had spent 26 years being told I didn't deserve. And when the Duke of Cavendish presented his wife at the next season's opening ball in London, the ton held its collective breath. They had heard the rumors, the seamstress, the train, the scandal. But the woman who descended the grand staircase on the Duke's arm was not a scandal. She was a force. Midnight blue silk, steady hands, eyes that had seen the inside of a railway gunfight and an operating theater and had not flinched at either. A duchess whispered to her companion, "Is that really the seamstress?" The Duke heard her. He leaned down, his lips brushing my ear, and murmured, "Shall I correct her, or would you prefer to?" "Let them wonder," I said, smiling. "I've been invisible my whole life. Being mysterious is a significant upgrade." He laughed, that low, warm, startled sound, and pulled me onto the dance floor, and the Duke of Cavendish danced with his wife, as though she were the only person in the room. Because to him she always had been, from the very first moment on the 4:15 to Edinburgh, when a penniless woman with a meat pie and a surgeon's hands looked a bleeding Duke in the eye and said, "Take off your coat, darling.